Good afternoon. It is February 20th, 2023. This is Rob Sin at CEO Technician on Twitter, at Goldfinger on CEO.ca. And this presentation is focused on the pivot to global energy transition. So, what does that mean? Well, before I get into that, some forward-looking statements. Um, Obviously, I'm going to talk about potential future events, um, things that may or may not actually occur, and nothing in this presentation should be considered investment advice. You should always consult a licensed investment advisor before making any investment decisions. So, first slide. The world has very clearly made a decision that it's time to transition from fossil fuels to renewable forms of energy, so-called green energy. However, very few people actually understand the structural constraints on this transition. And the number one constraint on it is mining and the production of battery metals. Um, we're already seeing a race, for example, General Motors investing in Thacker Pass, lithium and rare earths, and rumors that Tesla is investing in or buying Sigma, lithium mining company. Those are just two examples. There's many more, but the most important thing to understand is that an electric vehicle requires 400% more metals and minerals than internal combustion vehicles, right? So to allow to empower this EV revolution to take hold, we need to mine a lot more metals. So that means expanding current mining operations and permitting new ones. And right now, the world appears to be woefully unprepared. And a lot of this green energy transition, EV revolution, call it what you will, seems to be mainly talking points with minimal actual action so far. But that could be about to change very soon. The US government draining the strategic petroleum reserve is a real tangible example of this commitment to the energy transition. So um, we've spent a lot of years, 30 years building it up, and we've drained over half of it in about a year. So we're burning the boats, so to speak, betting on renewables and EV battery vehicles, right? Um, there's a lot of negativity out in the world right now, right? But I think the one thing that we have to bet on is human progress will continue and mankind will figure out how to evolve, how to move forward. And we think back, like, our lives are better today than they were 50 years ago. They're better today than they were 100 years ago in almost every tangible way that you could, imagine. Um, the world continues to evolve and progress. Technology continues to accelerate, and obviously there's some challenges and there's a lot of things that need to be figured out as technology accelerates so much. But I think the important takeaway, if there's one from this presentation, is that let's stay optimistic. Human progress and innovation will continue. And actually, copper is a critical component of human progress. We'll go into that a little bit more. We are entering the capex stage of the cycle in which metals and commodities will constitute an essential part of investor portfolios. So, in order to rebuild infrastructure, in order to rewire the grid, in order to expand the power grid globally, in order to manufacture EVs. In order to produce solar panels at a massively accelerating pace, we need commodities. And it's simple as that. Here's the chart of the SPR being drained rapidly in the last year or so. So it took us 30 years to build it up from 250 million to over 700 million. It's taken us barely a year to drain more than 50% of it. So we are burning our bridges. This is just one news article. There's quite a few. If you look, where the Department of the Interior, so the U.S. government, is constructing a transmission line between Southern California and Central Arizona. So this is for clean, reliable, and affordable electricity. So imagine how much metals this 125-mile transmission line is going to need. Imagine how much copper is going to go into that wiring of this transmission line. Okay, I don't have the stats, but this is a very high voltage, big transmission line over 125 miles. That is no joke. And this is just one of many examples of infrastructure programs, expansion of the power grid that is taking place globally today. Requires a lot of copper. So despite the fact that we have all this negativity in the world and many economists are forecasting a recession globally in 2023, copper is trading well above $4 a pound today. In fact, it's almost $4.20 as I speak these words. And it's in a very clear long-term uptrend. So if most people are very negative on the global economy, and copper is thought of as Dr. Copper, a real gauge of global economic activity, why is it still trading so well? Why is it still in an uptrend? That's a good question to ask. And maybe a lot of it has to do with this EV revolution, this green energy transition. Maybe it has a lot to do with China accumulating and replenishing its inventories. I don't have all the answers, but I have questions and I can see price trends, right? Freeport-McMoRan, one of the largest copper producers in the world, in pretty clear uptrend on the daily, sort of finding support at the 50-day moving average recently. And this could be interpreted as a bull flag pattern. So pretty good chart for a big copper producer. Not bearish, right? So this is a pretty powerful slide. It's not relevant to copper specifically, but the overall green energy transition and mining that's going to have to take place. So this is the largest increase in consumption of metals in human history that we're facing. These are the numbers, increases by 2040. So lithium, we're going to need more than 4,000% more lithium versus 2020, 2,500% more graphite versus 2020. And you can see a lot more nickel, a lot more cobalt, a lot more rare earths. This is the largest increase in demand for metals in human history that we are entering right now. So this is not a small transition. This is not a small transformation of the global economy. This is massive, nothing short of massive. Copper. So this is a popular chart. We've seen a lot of charts like this over the last decade or so. But it's important to note that if we continue on trend, okay, we will move into a significant global supply shortage sometime around 2027, okay, in copper. And these possible projects, as of right now, any one in the possible category, I would say, is quite improbable. Usually the possible copper mine projects are ones that have significant either permitting challenges that aren't likely to go away anytime soon, or just capex numbers that are not that are so high they're just not going to get built. Right, we're talking in the many billions of dollars. Um, so this is a noteworthy graphic, and the trend of required copper mine supply is very clear and very robust. And the pipeline of copper mines of scale that are realistically going to be in production in the next 5 years is not very impressive. Um, yeah, so this is just another of the same sort of theme chart, compound annual growth rate for all these different metals, 2019 to 2025. Number one is nickel, number two is silver, number three is copper. Um, and these are strong rates of growth for these three metals. And you can see the transition that is set to take place over the next couple of decades. Well, a lot more energy, okay? A lot more energy. And all of this energy, now, whether it's solar, wind, nuclear, or batteries, requires a lot more metals. The energy transition is the key driver for metals like copper, like nickel, like silver. And just for solar, we will require 3.2 million tons of additional copper by 2030. EV sales approaching 40 million in 2030, another 2 million tons of additional copper. So put it together, this is an absolute sea change, an enormous sea change in the consumption of copper and the amount of copper supply, new copper supply that's needed for the energy transition. Just a quick refresher: primary uses of copper: wiring, transmission lines, EVs. Average EV contains nearly 200 pounds of copper. Phone lines, electronic products, roofing and plumbing. Obviously, copper piping is very common. Housing, so kitchen sinks, copper doorknobs, pull handles. The typical single-family home contains roughly 500 pounds of copper. So just think: new home, 500 pounds of copper; new Tesla, 200 pounds of copper. And then think about that on a global scale, how much copper is needed. And these are relatively minor, uses of copper, but still notable. So how do we invest in copper? Well, one option, I think a very good one actually, is to take Robert Friedland's advice and build your new house out of copper bricks. So if you do that, it's going to be a lot more than 500 pounds of copper. But if you cover that copper with wallboard, so you forget it's in the walls, 10 years from now, you'll be able to tear down that house and buy a fleet of electric Lamborghinis with your profits. Now, obviously, that's a pretty outlandish statement. Definitely got a lot of headlines when he said it a couple of years ago. But I do think that if one is able to, having physical copper stored, maybe 100-pound copper sheets in a safe location, would be a reasonably good investment. Obviously, it's very heavy and impractical for most people to do that. So the other option is to invest in copper miners. You just need a brokerage account to do that. Again, this is not investment advice. This is just purely for entertainment purposes, and might be educational for some people. But copper mining stocks, you just need a brokerage account. Freeport-McMoRan is a go-to one in the U.S. Southern Copper, Ivanhoe Mine, speaking of Robert Friedland, very high grade, but it's in the Congo. Some people might not want to invest in a mine in Central Africa, right? So Freeport and Southern Copper would be lower risk options, but Ivanhoe obviously is much higher grade, and you have a visionary mining legend, chairman and large shareholder, Robert Friedland, gets a lot of headlines, a lot of attention. Projects that are in the feasibility or permitting stage, not yet built, would include Western Copper, ASCU in Arizona, and definitely there's plenty of large copper deposits that are sitting kind of idle in Alaska that have different kinds of permitting challenges, either roads or environmental permitting challenges. So you need to do your research on these kinds of projects, but that would be the second sort of tier of options in terms of risk. And then the final tier which has most likely the highest risk and also the highest potential upside would be pure exploration plays. So companies that don't necessarily have a resource or not a significant resource and are doing early stage sort of exploration work. Um, they're drilling. They're drilling to try to prove up a new discovery. So these are just four that I came up with. Pan Global, American Eagle, 9 Mile Metals, Kodiak Copper. So interestingly enough, I own 3 of the 4 stocks in this list. The ones I own are Pan Global, American Eagle, and 9 Mile Metals. Again, that is not an investment recommendation, just my personal choices. And then drilling down a little deeper on one of them, which would be American Eagle. I think it needs to change its name from American Eagle Gold to American Eagle Copper and Gold, because the NINE.CA project near Smithers in BC, Canada, has a significant amount of copper as well as gold. And I think actually the copper aspect of it might really be the more interesting part of this project, and might drive the interest in the future. So this area near Smithers has good infrastructure. It has road access to the project. So you're in a pretty good location as far as getting labor, putting a crew to drill in a camp during the summertime, and just having access to it, right? Early stage, this NINE.CA project is definitely early stage, but encouraging results so far. So historically, it has had some shallow, drilling done. Project went dormant for a number of years until American Eagle picked it up in 2022. The 2022 program, 7 holes were drilled, and basically what you have is you have pretty good grades in these 6-7 holes across a roughly 700 meter strike length area. But this is still very early stage. I mean, 7 holes is not enough to give confirmation of much. Probably going to need to drill a lot more to prove this thing out. But the results so far are encouraging, and they demonstrate grade continuity. So near surface, then down to about 400 or so meters, including this, interval in hole number 4 the company recently put out. So we're talking about 400 to 500, meters down hole. You got a 90-meter section, about 1% copper equivalent. So that's very encouraging. I mean, 1% copper is considered to be a very good grade in 2023. 20 years ago wasn't quite as impressive, but one thing that you should know for sure about mining is ore grades continue to decline over time. So 1% copper equivalent is actually a pretty darn good grade in 2023, especially in a good jurisdiction like BC, Canada. And as far as the copper component itself, actually there's plenty of large-scale copper mines globally that are mining ore at like a 0.3% head grade, 0.35%, 0.4%. So if American Eagle is able to prove up a solid scale area at NINE.CA that has copper grades of 0.4% or thereabouts, and then copper equivalent when you include in the gold of maybe 0.6%, 0.7%, you could have a mine on your hands here. The key is going to be to prove the continuity of the deposit and the scale of it. And so the 2023 program, which will start most likely in June, Company has just recently raised a couple $1 million to fund that. We'll step out from the holes drilled in 2022 and also fill in some gaps in those 2022 holes to try to prove up the continuity of the deposit, and then also to expand it and find more of the higher grade areas like this in hole 4, this 1% copper equivalent area. And this is just a little visual showing. So this is the historical work that was done. These little lines here, shallow drilling. So this is not very deep. And the 3D inversion model shows that it could increase. So the deposit extends at depth. This big intrusion extends to depth, and the grade could increase, sort of like in hole 4, where they got down to about 400 meters down hole, and they hit that nice interval of about 1% copper equivalent. So this would be one of the main objectives for 2023, is to prove out this interpretation of this 3D model that they have in the presentation. So again, I think American Eagle is a very interesting copper gold junior that has a lot of potential upside, solid management team, and at the current market cap, like $10-11 million with a couple $1 million in the treasury, it's relatively low risk. Of course, it is an exploration company and always has financing risk, but pretty low valuation that leaves a lot of upside if they're able to prove this thing out at NAC. So thanks a lot for your time and attention.